All right, Amy Mackay. Welcome to What's My Thesis. I'm Javier Proenza, and today my guest is Amy Mackay. Amy, you are a painter, and you just had a show at LA Beast. It's still up while we record, but it'd probably be down.
It'll be down. The last, it's closing this Saturday, so
Okay.
a couple more days.
Well, tell me about that. Or we could start with your art origins before we get there. I just like to highlight stuff.
No, I mean, which one?
Well, it's just, I guess we'll start a little bit talking about the LA Beast show and then maybe come back to it.
Totally. So that show it felt like
just a heads up. There's a torture chamber.
I can hear something. Yeah.
That's coming from the torture dungeon that I have down below.
So it's just keeping me on the toes. So yeah, that show I was really excited to get to do because it was a kind of baby project that I had initially had planned for 2020. Mm-hmm. And so part of how I like to make work is by creating a sort of group event or group performance, and then that becomes the catalyst for the series of paintings. So this one started a really long time ago. I was obsessed with the idea of having an audience experience a performance that while they were inside a pool or a body of water. Mm-hmm. And so from there, I kind of...
Wait, so there's a pool at the show?
Not at the show. So we did end up creating an event where I kind of eventually found a play that felt like it would be interesting to experience in that kind of setting, found a stage. But I had kind of planned all of this in 2020. Naturally, that fell apart. And so then
it's like 4 years in the making.
Exactly. So then when I had met Le Beast and Roxana and Zach, who are amazing.
Is that how you say it?
It's something I think that is. And yes, it's something.
I'm just gonna pretend I didn't think it was LA Beast.
Everybody does. That is the most universal conversation I have with people. But it was one of the ways that we connected actually, as they saw that I had this Borges book about imaginary beings, and they had been reading it at the same time. And I think we both had this shared interest in
this is over
kind of mythological storytelling. So
this is through Instagram, or
this was through an accidental studio visit that we had, which is how we met. And so anyways, rabbit hole, then they were excited to do a project together. And I basically was like, either I could do work based on past events, or there's this one project that I've been obsessed with and I still haven't gotten to do, but I need time to build it. And they were like, let's go with that. So then it was this amazing process where about a year ago, we staged this performance in this really incredible backyard in Pasadena. It was, an incredible thing to be a part of and to help bring to life. And then this past year has just been the process of making paintings, documenting that. So the show is ended up being a lot more about the text in the play. And now I'm actually going to continue a series that's going to be more related to the performance and like the environment and the audience. So.
And then can you tell us, I know you're not officially an LA Beast representative, but what is that space? What is their...
What are they about?
Or is it an artist run place? Is it...
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious as to how they would position themselves now.
But I put you on the spot.
Yeah, I mean, that's where, not to speak for them, but I do, but they are, I mean, Zach, who's one of the people who founded it, he's an artist, and Roxana is more affiliated in kind of the design world, but it's definitely a creative space made by creative people. But that's, I'm curious because it's still a pretty new space. So I feel like that's where, I wouldn't want to put words in their mouth, but, it feels it's a very supportive environment, which is great.
There's a very strong community vibe is what it sounds like.
Yeah.
And they're interacting and whatnot. So, okay, then let's get a little bit into your origins. We were talking about how MC is, before we started recording, MC is Irish and MAC is Scottish.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So how did how long are you has your family been here Mayflower days or where are you from?
It's a mixture. So it's weird because I have kind of Scottish the MAC comes from my dad's side, where I don't even know how long they've been around, but his parents were Californians for a while and have been on the West Coast for a bit. But my mom's side is actually more Scottish. And so and then my grandma immigrated here from Scotland. So it's funny because it's on both sides. But yeah, so that's where
media
it's
is
a
terrible,
mixture.
because I immediately thought, when you said more Scottish, I just pictured Michael Myers going, "Hid."
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not odd. Like, the funny thing about my grandmother is that she had the wildest accent, which was like, part of the reason why she came here was this kind of aspirational, she wanted to escape her own class. Like, she was the eldest of 9 girls. It was a very, she had a rough ride when she was younger. And she just was like, I don't care about the responsibilities that I'm supposed to have as an eldest. Like, I'm bouncing out of here.
Yeah.
And she saved up what she could and was, and ended up, she lived in upstate New York, working for really rich people. But it was almost like she had this very deep Scottish accent that was pretending to be English. Like, it was like this fusion. She was, and it was hysterical. I don't know anybody else. It was just a very specific sound. It was great. But her whole family, it was just sometimes very hard to understand them. So it's there.
Really?
The Scottish brogue is like, it's dense.
Yeah, that's funny. I just never thought of like generations of people that speak the same language not being able to understand each other.
Totally. But it wasn't, I didn't interact with, like, I would have distant cousins come, and I don't know. You think about how dialects exist even regionally. And so in some ways it... Like
the OC or the Orange County accent.
Right, exactly. So it's like to think, it's the same language, and yet it's so within each community, it obviously has its own evolution. So
yeah. No, that's crazy. So, okay, then in your family, like, when did you start to get senses of art? Was there resistance to that? Because, you're pretty much, I guess it's going to sound so pop sci, but you're a self-actualized artist. You know?
Yeah. That's nice. I'll take that.
It's such a corny way of putting it, but like you're active, you're productive, and you're showing. So
yeah.
And I think that, like, you probably have people like me that are fans that, like, just enjoy your painting. I think that, like, in a time where there's a lot of acknowledgement of figurative work, there's something, there's like there's an area of painter that is kind of in this postmodern place where, I don't know about you, but in school there was this very intense sense of, like, virtuosity for the sake of virtuosity is kind of pardon the terminology, but self-masturbatory,
I'm with you on that. Yeah.
But it's interesting. There's this other guy that I'm trying to have on the show, Dana Piazza, who does, it's not, I wouldn't even know if it's abstracted work, but it's work about mark making, and I think that your stuff, would you agree with that? Like that yours is very much about mark making. It's not drawing, it's painting, but it's not a dig, but like the virtuosity of that the fetishization of sort of the process. It's a postmodern, but I think that it kind of, like, it's not about making sloppy work. It's about making really interesting, tight stuff that is loose. Does that make sense? And that is not necessarily tied to, it's tied to painting traditions, but it is almost a breaking down of the whole process. Am I making sense? Are you following me?
Yeah, I think so. It sounds like you're curious about how I relate to the process of mark making, or is that?
Well, I mean, I think that that's pretty heavy in your work, but I would say that it's about the confidence of the mark making, right? Like, and the virtuosity of the mark making. Does that make sense? Which I think it's still abstract work, but it fits, you know, as opposed to like dripping and stuff like that,
right.
you know?
Yeah, I think I mean, I feel like a lot of questions in there.
I ask,
yeah,
and you answer.
No, it's all good. Yeah, I mean, I guess
from
the beginning of what it sounded, in terms of the question about my kind of the rabbit hole of art making, I thankfully had very supportive parents who were encouraging to that. I'd say if anyone influenced me the most, I had a really, I mean, my aunt, who's not even a blood related aunt, but my mom kind of rolled with like, we had a very strong extended family. And she was the one that would kind of take me to museums or take me out to go painting. And she's this incredible watercolor painter herself, but never kind of followed through that trajectory in a, you know, more professional capacity. And so I had influences that were really supportive. I was always like a nerd also, and was just very much interested in a ton of different things. And so for me, art was always something I was interested in, but it was always tethered within a bigger set of interests. And so it wasn't until being in like college that I started to kind of, once I dabbled in being like, okay, do I want to be, you know, study political science or sociology or blah, 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 blah. I kind of realized that everything else felt like it was, the deeper that you went, the more it would silo you into one set of research. And art seemed like the one space where you could be a scientist, you could be a political theorist, you know, it's like there's no rules in terms of the terrain that you're able to explore. And so that's where I was like, oh, this feels like a home base. And but in that way, it was a shock to my family when I did, you know, basically tell them that I wanted to be an art major. It was a big surprise.
Well, just the immigrant, you know,
there's
Scottish grandmother that came to elevate in class.
I think it's like they always thought, and I was just like, I don't know, I was an intense kid and passionate about a lot of things. And they, I think, just like, were like, we thought you were going to be like radicalized art education or like be a lawyer or something. And I was just like, no, painting is amazing. But I do think that's where it's always been a process of still trying to find a way to honor both like all of these different interests. So, but art feels like a space where I can do that. In terms of painting specific, I feel like I was really lucky in terms of who I was exposed to at a really young age. And so where I went to school at Bard, and it was such a conceptual based program, but there was still I was in community with like a handful of people that were still interested in painting, which was like so like out of fashion in a way in terms of the rest of what everyone else was doing.
What year was this?
I started school in 2003 and graduated in 2007. Okay. And it just, it felt like it was like, you know, the tradition doing something more traditional, which is like, you know, so not punk or something. But for me, there was still, I don't know. It's like, it's amazing to me that painting is something that has been done for 40,000 years and it still makes us feel things. And like, for whatever reason, this like crazy magical dirt and can do things that like screens can't, or so many other print-based media can't. I don't know. It still like is amazing to me. And it's been a journey in terms of how I relate to image making in terms of painting. But I think that the mark, some of it was like, I think about obviously gesture and mark making is a big part of it.
Gesture's the word I was missing.
Well, it's something that's more tethered, I will say, to process and thinking about like that's part of why I liked creating this larger structure where it kind of forces me out of the conversation of like painting code, which I feel not inspired by
what
or
do you mean
interested.
by like codifying visual information into
Kind of like how even a mark like can remind you of another painter, or like can, in terms of like the history of painting, there's so much.
So you want to get away from the baggage of referential painting.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. And so where it gets to be a kind of, which to me, that's what can become masturbatory, or it's like this kind of container where obviously there is like an amazing lineage and kind of art family to draw from. But at the same time, yeah, it's exciting to me with each event or each project. I feel like I'm entering a new thing and there's new problems. And then it becomes like, how can I, what are the ways to use the paint in the way to honor that experience, as opposed to thinking. So yeah, then it like activates a different kind of search within the mark making that's different than if it was just about trying to make something that looks nice. I don't know.
Yeah, no, but I get that. But I guess not to like be like I was right about what I said. But what I was alluding to is that gestural thing. Those are things that you associate with like the artist. You know, like when I see your painting, I see your gestures. Right, which is, I think, an interesting way of, and it makes sense now that you say that. First of all, when you were like, I had to restrain myself when you were saying that you were like, people thought painting was passe, because it's like, like that's why I asked you what year.
Right. Yeah.
You know, it is such a specific thing. Yeah. But that's not necessarily a negative in your case, because you seem to have internalize those things, but I really like that, and you know, there's definitely, like, you're in good company for people that do that. Not that you do the same kind of work as Dana, and I hope I'm saying that's the problem with reading names off of Instagram. I do know Piazza is correct. But yeah, there is something interesting about how you're working in abstraction. You're still working with composition. There's still a sense of depth, right? In terms of, like, what's the biggest brush you use? How big are these paintings?
At this point, I'm working at a really broad scale. So it's like for so long, I couldn't do medium-sized paintings. Like, it was just so hard. There's something about the window scale that was like, is it a mirror? Is it a window? Like, in the past, it was all about like really large, almost mural scale size, like 6x8, something like that, or really tiny guys. And now it's kind of working the spectrum. So the smallest being like a little 8x10 nugget, and then the biggest being very expansive and like full bodied. So, but I like that they do such different things. Like, I relate to this scale. Yeah, scale, I think about a lot in terms of how we experience the work, and I feel like they just do such cool different things. So,
do you think that it might have been a mechanical thing for you, like in terms of gesture, being able to feel more comfortable doing size, like bigger and then smaller? You know, like maybe the connection of your, I'm now going back to art school, figure drawing class, but like, you know, like when you're working small, you're using maybe mostly your wrist, and then when you're working big, you're maybe using but you're like the in between was like a struggle. Does that ring at all true, or is that just a silly?
I think it's like, I mean, I became more interested in it. So for me, I guess some of the interest is maybe rooted in some sort of bigger conceptual structures in terms of how I approach it. Because
let's get into that.
But it's also, I'll say that it started with, because my background was in figurative painting, and I was like, that was my jam. That's all I cared about. I still feel like I make paintings about people. That's what it's all about, even though it ends up translated as abstract imagery. Every piece is figurative to me still.
Is it based off of visual references that are figurative?
Each one, yeah. So it's and so it kind of became, there was a certain point though, and I don't know why. This is where it's like, there's just sometimes mysteries in our process. But I turned a corner and I was just like, became almost allergic with seeing a like figure in my own work. And I then got to the point where it became a new kind of interesting problem in terms of how to represent something like that, or to kind of what are the boundaries of what you can include in an image that are kind of, what's the boundary of recognition with when it starts to look like something versus when it is totally, untethered from what it's representing. And so that became, I just started kind of going down a rabbit hole in terms of the process, painting as being this like really cool site for us to think about how we see. And that then, so that's kind of where mark making became more present, because it became more about like, how can I empty this image out and play with the limit of what is represented, but still have it carry kind of something that is very specific to its original source. So that's where it's kind of this constant game with each project, where I'll kind of start with more representational imagery just as a way of like working through it. And then it kind of becomes this editing out, or it's like sometimes like it becomes crystallized to me. So I'm interested in kind of the economy of imagery, just how that plays with how kind of, how we can think about the different ways that we see what we're seeing, or how it kind of sometimes can fuck with what you think you're seeing. So that became interesting to me, where it's like more of a play. There's kind of a space of doubt where you're like, maybe that looks like something that I recognize, or like, but I'm interested in where that space, that kind of space for doubt for the viewer is interesting to me.
Yeah. But I find it interesting because it's very painterly. Which is not something that you can always say about painting, which I really appreciate about it. Would it be helpful to explain more directly what you were representing from the performance in the
the most recent project?
To just kind of illustrate a little bit that process a little bit more specifically, like this is a reference for this kind of thing, or is that too direct of a question?
No, I can talk about that. I mean, so the project that I just finished is based, so the performance was about it's called By the Bog of Cats is the play. Okay. And so
you didn't write the play.
I didn't write the play. This amazing other person wrote it. And
is it an old play? Is it someone you know?
It's a contemporary playwright. Her name's Marina Carr. I don't know her. Okay. But I'm a huge fan. And so it's an adaptation of Medea, but set in an Irish bog.
But not the Tyler Perry.
Not the Tyler Perry. Yeah, exactly. Although that's where I do that's where I tend to really gravitate towards projects that have kind of multiple iterations like already embedded in them. So the fact that there even is that as part of the narrative, like to me, that's interesting. But that was the performance, was this play by Marina Carr, and it's an incredibly tragic story because Medea,
I'm actually not familiar.
So Medea, the kind of
spoilers for Medea,
crescendo is like this operatic Greek tragedy where essentially Medea is she's kind of like rejected by her love and baby daddy Jason, and in an act of revenge, the kind of final climax, she ends up killing their kids. So it's like she's so
it's like La Llorona kind of.
Yeah. So it's like that's where I'm interested in these archetypes that like translate into so many different spaces.
For sure.
Like
I love that her lover's name is Jason.
Right. Yeah, just Jason.
Wait, so was Jason like a Greek name? Isn't Jason Jason and the Argonauts like a Greek thing?
Okay. Yeah. But so in this play, there is a really, so the similar structure is basically this amazing character is rejected by her love, and the whole play ends with her killing her daughter. And it's just, by the time I always get to that scene, it's just like, I can't, like, it's so gut wrenching. And the way it was amazing. The people who performed it were incredible.
You empathize with Medea while she kills her kids? Is that, that's okay. Wow. That's a good play.
Well, it's also, she's like just that's one of the things that I liked about the play is there's just a great cast of character. I mean, she's kind of this like really crude, ballsy, witchy character who, because she is so another kind of part that I liked about the play that's different than Medea is another kind of central premise is that she's basically people are trying to kick her off her land. And so she's like born on the bog. She is like of the bog. And this other wealthy family is basically trying to buy her out and kick her out of the place where she grew up. And so there's this other part of it where you do feel like she's there's something just like wrong with how she's being treated in this scenario, and the sense of like I think about it in terms of displacement. And so there's every character in the play has something really tragic or some sort of secret that they're holding. And so it's a really great play. The reason why I say this in response to your question is that it is. So I ended up really, and like the body of work that I've just finished lent a lot more into the story than I usually do. Once we kind of completed the performance, I realized only after I had started making work that I could have done a show for each act. Like there was so much content, both in terms of just the performance and seeing the space itself was this incredible location, and I bought just like an absurd amount of pool toys, and like people were floating around, and like there's just the scene, there's all these different vantage points. And I had a couple friends come and help document it, and just told them like document everything, like everything is a part of the performance. And so where I had to kind of eventually make a decision because of the show coming up at Le Beast to, figure out how can I simplify the structure for this show so that it's like an editing process. Like I almost think about it like making a film. It's like you have all this material and then you have to figure out what the story is in kind of after the fact. So the way it kind of made sense to me was like, okay, I feel like I really have to tell Hester was the main character in this play. Like, I feel like I have to tell her story. And
she's the Medea character.
She's the Medea character. And so that's kind of what I focused on for that show. And then now, as I said, I'll switch to focusing on this kind of larger event structure. So each of the pieces in the show represent usually a different scene or a different character. So that's where I kind of asked myself with every body of work, like what has to be included. And so there's certain kind of really integral moments that they just become like the stars of what happened. And so, that's where, so each one is kind of a different character, a different event. A lot of this there's like a secret ghost brother. And I was like, okay, secret ghost brother, we got to have him in there. We got to have like this Act 2 wedding scene. So some of this is translatable, and I was happy the secret ghost brother character, when he encountered the painting of him, he knew it was him, which I was really excited by, even though it's very much an abstract painting. So, but I was like, yes. So sometimes it's translated in a way that's more recognizable, but in other ways, it's more just about thinking through the different structures of kind of feeling and figuration and embodiment and that's what ends up guiding the decisions within the paintings. So
that's really interesting, because even though it's abstract, you're still working within the narrative elements of painting. You know,
Yeah.
it essentially sounds like you've taken this play and you've made your Feast of Herod, Annunciation, all of those little details.
Yeah.
So to me, when I hear you talk about this, I just know that you're like, despite your program being more conceptual, you're very well informed on painting, like painting history and on it as a material, despite the fact that you're working within these certain confines. It's not, it answers my question about how you might feel about Clement Greenberg.
Oh, yeah.
You know, which the answer is you're probably not very, very into him.
No, that's definitely not my guy.
No, I totally love that. Well, who are your guys? Also, I wanted to ask you a question. Are your paintings always, you gendered them as little guys? And I thought that was adorable.
Oh,
like,
funny. Yeah.
I know that may just have been, I don't want to necessarily read too much into that, but do you feel that way, or is that just a figure of speak?
It's funny. I do. Maybe it is. Well, I don't know. This sounds maybe cringy, but like they do become friends. And so, you know,
with each other and with you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's even how I make them, is in, I
but
think a lot about the relationships, less parental. Yeah. Okay. I think about them more like friends. And so, and sometimes and that is like with all the wonderful messiness that comes with that too. So
are they ever little girls or little ladies?
I do sometimes. It's funny. I should really slow down and like check myself when I do. Cause sometimes I'll say, yeah, like this big gal or like something like that. But I don't, yeah, but there's not a strict code. I do think sometimes it's intuitive. Yeah.
But that's just funny. A funny quirk that I picked up on.
That's really funny.
But okay, so then who are your like early on and then now? You know, like the this person got me really into this way of thinking. This person got me into this.
Yeah, that's where it's funny. I had someone ask me this yesterday out of nowhere, which was like, "Who are my favorite painters?" And I was just like, "What? That's what a huge question." But I do think, I mean, what I'll say, yesterday when someone asked me that, my go-to, I still love a lot of just like the classics. So it's like people like Goya is like a real, it's funny, a lot of it is not stuff that necessarily informs the like actual structure of a composition or the aesthetic of a work. And I do kind of relate to it more on a feeling sense. Like Goya is like, there's just this depth and like, you know that he's making things from a very real perspective. There's just something, it's like a weird feeling that you can have sometimes looking at certain types of paintings. But I'll say one of the most transformative experiences that I had when I was younger that still stands out to me to this day was when I was a kid, like in high school, there was a retrospective. I grew up in the Bay Area, and there was a retrospective of Gerhard Richter.
Okay.
And it was the first time that I saw someone make work across different styles. And I was like, that's allowed? Like, you can do that? And I think that kind of blew my mind in a way. And there was a period of time where reading his interviews or journals, I was really fascinated, almost where it's like, and in some ways I sometimes do connect with some painters that are almost suspicious of painting, like where there's like this bigger question about what it's doing in a way that's bordering on being critical of it. And so I feel like that's planted a seed there. But
so you would say Gerhard Richter's one of those, or do you have other examples?
I mean, well, so someone who was a huge influence and happened to miraculously be my beginning painting instructor was Amy Silman. And so she is still, I'll say, like, I think writes about painting in one of the most incredible ways. And is similarly, it's almost like being really for and against. And so there's this, I mean, I think it's an operation that I connect to where there's kind of, and even this where it's like what I'm describing in terms of me wanting to like I'll spend so much time crafting this experience with this group of people that is meant to then be translated into paintings. And then there's a kind of this urge to wanting to negate that and to have something that isn't so direct, or like to kind of undermine it too. And so there's, I don't know, it's hard to say, but I mean, there's other just classics. It's like, I feel like I could list it off in terms of
we got time.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'll say like
people are interested.
Like Bernard's like use of color, like that's where, and mark making, like that's where you go and see one of his pieces in person. And there's something also about the process. I'm like constantly fascinated by, again, it's like the relationship between how we're encountering these painted objects and how it brings attention to the way that we see. And so when you see one of his pieces like reproduced in a book or something, and then it's so different when you see it in person and see how much it falls apart, like just even how little material there is. And yet it's, yeah, I just absolutely love how he can kind of, the layering of mark making, creating this almost like magical flicker of color, but then when you see it and it's just kind of, there's a raw canvas, and I don't know, there's something really beautiful and stunning about that to me. Like Manet was one of my big people when I was a figurative person more, but like there's something about his like dirty tonal, it's like it's almost the opposite of color. It's like just all about this kind of murky, buttery, I don't know. It's like I could stare at one of his painted shoes forever. It's like there's just the way, yeah, it's one of those things where it's like the painting becomes like a body. It's so beautiful.
Do you like, I'm first of all, I'm noticing there's not a lot of like, you're not referencing, you're like, you're very much sticking to like modernists and after kind of painters. That's just an observation, not a criticism.
Totally. Well, that's where I'll say it's like that's what came up and I realized that it was like these are the people that maybe when I was in school really younger. So now it's like there's other people I'll say that have influenced me in different way. I mean, if I'm thinking
before we get into that, I was more interested, what is it about modernism specifically that resonates, especially with your practice? I came up with that question because the first question was going to be, or as you were talking, I was thinking, well, what are your more meaningful movements that resonate with you? But then I realized, like, okay, I mean, I have the answer to that question.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny again. It's like I don't know if I think about it in terms of movements, and I will say, I guess it's like, I think that's why it's such a hard question for me sometimes because, and I know it maybe goes against the like elevator pitch we're supposed to have of being
no. This is an hour-long podcast.
These are my people. But I'm just, I don't know. Like there's I feel like I could say incredible things about just each.
Well, what did you get? What do you get out of modernism? That maybe.
I mean, I don't know if I get it. It's like the modernist that movement. I don't know if I get out of the movement itself as opposed to some of those art. And again, those are like, I would say the earlier influences, of which you had more access to, like before going to galleries or learning more about contemporary practices. But if there was a movement that I would say I'm more aligned with, it would be like early modernism, like in like the Russian avant-garde, in terms of, not saying that that's who I am, but what I get excited about was looking at how people were starting to work together and also break down. Yeah, it's like when you're starting to break down what it is that these different mediums can do, and how people were kind of just like, playing with the interaction across different materials or different practices, or I think about how certain painters doing like costume design for plays or operas, or that's maybe where it resonates, is that there was things were kind of starting to break down in a way that I think was the obvious precursor to where we're at today, where it's kind of like the boundaries across different practices is like totally negligible, and there's no rules in terms of grounding yourself in one set of explorations. So,
but I would also say that it's like modernism. You know, when you're in art history class, they teach you is like this is the first painting of a mob. You know, like of a mass. You know, in Paris and whatnot. It is the closest to the farthest back you could probably go to relating contemporary times. Even though there is such a difference between modernism and postmodernism, there is a societal documentation that's happening as this turn of industrialization and the access to the camera and stuff like that. So that's kind of where direct photorealistic representation starts to maybe fall out of favor, and for these things that are a lot more expressive.
Yeah. But it's interesting that you bring that up in terms of the documentation, because that's kind of a question that I'm constantly interested in, partly because of just the way that media is such it's totally infused into every aspect of our life these days. And so just the question of what can count as a document of something, which again is going back to Greenberg, is like, that's where I'm interested in the total opposite of art for its, I mean, granted, celebrate it. I'll celebrate anybody who wants to make art in that way. Mm-hmm. But for me, it's like, I'm interested in how it's tethered to something also outside myself. And then this question of like, okay, can a painting do the same thing that a photograph can do? Or what does it mean for a color to be used to document something? And like, what counts as like being an actual artifact?
Well, like Guernica, for example, is a perfect example of that. Like, it's not representational, but you get a visceral explanation of what, and it's so relevant to like everything that happened after. Because I don't think that's like a very specific. I forget what Guernica. That was what, World War I. Yeah, I think so. Right? Oh my God! Please comment down below and shame us for not knowing history.
I don't know.
but that is,
when was Picasso making work again? Yeah.
Well, I mean, despite its limitations and all of that, like, mostly white, not a lot of women, art history is still a pretty interesting thing to go back to, because you study history books and it's almost like the sensitive people's history, right? Like how people are internalizing a lot of the stuff that's happening at the time.
Right. Yeah. And that's, I mean, at the same time, yeah, it's funny. It's a conversation I have with students. Is like, then you think about the cause and effect of how people are also just responding to what came before. And that, I just think it's like impossible to look at history without looking at that kind of reactive, creative lineage that happens. And I think about like something like mannerism as being, it's like, another one favorite movement, it's like, what a bunch of weirdos. Like, they're just like, how far can we stretch this? And they're taking something that people have perfected in terms of being like, oh, now we know how to really make something that looks so true to life. And then they're just fucking with it. And it's really fun. And so, again, that's something that doesn't necessarily actively inform my work, but there's so many things to celebrate in it. So, yeah, but there's people that work today, I mean, to call attention to, I guess, this is maybe what you're speaking to in terms of what modernism was starting to break open, which is like, okay, there's the idea of it starting to represent our life and like the experience of everyday people in this broader way. But then there's also, to me, so that opens up and kind of can extend to maybe where I get excited is like where process starts to also become part of content. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I definitely align myself, or that's a really crucial part to how I think through my work in general, is just that the paintings themselves are not autonomous. Like, they're a part of this larger structure, and almost like thinking about the performance in the paintings as being, deeply connected. And so then, that's what kind of that era opened up, was like, well, what about this like performative part of making work? How does that affect the content?
But it's oddly both egalitarian and like, right, because if you, I mean, I guess paint and materials could be considered expensive, but in a traditional sense, but in a traditional sense, like, right, we just referenced the Manorists, like, you could still, like, they weren't making anywhere near as much money, right?
Right.
So like, there's still an accessibility to painting. You can paint on trash, right? Like, as long as you get access to paints and stuff, but at the same time, like, not to pigeonhole you as a virtuous person, but there is something, like, there's something about you and your mark making with all the decision process, but the gestural elements of it as well, that makes it both egalitarian, accessible. Like, you could, in theory, like, I'm sure you've got people saying, like, I could do that. I'm sure they can't, but no, but you get what I'm saying? Like,
go for it.
Yeah, exactly. They're not, that's why you're so confident saying that, like, they can't. I mean, they could make it their own or whatever, but I think that that's a really interesting part of the element of what you are, like. Okay, like, painting is a big buffet. And then you go to that buffet and you focus on, like, you know what? I want to be a little bit leaner. I'm just going to have salad, or like, oh man, I'm getting steak, right? And so I find your paintings are still very much historical, even not in the way that you resent, but in that they fit, like they fit within a discipline. There's and they honor it in a very specific way. And I find that I definitely find that somewhat modernist, right? Like, I would be interested, we've been talking on the show with guests a lot. I just talked to somebody who came from Guatemala. They're over here, and they're very much interested in product design and the hiding of labor, right? Like an iPhone, you don't see how much works. Like, it's an intricate machine, and you can conceptualize it, but there's no marks that show, oh, the person's hand. Right. Whereas with your work, it's kind of very much centered on that, right? Like, it's almost the most prominent, more so than a figure or anything like that. The mark making is the most prominent thing. So I find it really interesting. Like, it goes to the, I had Rashid Buhamidi on, and do you know him at all?
I don't.
He knows everybody. So that's when you smiled, I was like,
I live in a bubble sometimes. So yeah,
we all do.
Yeah.
But he was talking, like, it was amazing. He's a huge painting fan, and he's with, like, one of the most historically knowledgeable about painting. That was a weird sentence structure, but you get what I'm saying. And like, at one point I asked him a question. He just was like, like, it hit him, and he was like, "That's like saying that painting is linear. That's like saying art history is linear, right?" Yeah. So it's interesting, because I do think that there is this sort of, like, I don't know about when you were in school, but there was sort of the sense that it was,
right?
And now you're a teacher. Yeah. And you're existing in this space where you are essentially in defiance of that, but not directly, and it's not conceptual, and it's not of the time, right? Like, it's not regressive, right? So what is that, like, what is their perspective on this stuff as you're teaching them? Like, what is their worldview? Especially because they grow up in a world that has so much media, like, I had a teacher one time hold up a magazine, and he goes, "What is this?" And everyone's like, "It's a car," blah, blah, blah. Oh, and then, like, the people started realizing that it was a trick question, and then he was like, "It's a magazine," and he goes, "No, it's a photograph of a car," right?
Yeah.
And so that was something that I had to learn. The difference between a thing and the image of a thing. Like, it sounds like really basic, especially for art students, but that is part of the art education.
Totally.
So is that, like, talk to me a little bit about that, because you're so well informed about painting. I'm actually curious about pedagogy and what you're coming up against.
Yeah,
we're like at 50 minutes. We can keep going.
I know,
There's momentum. I don't want to cut this off.
I'm down.
Okay.
I mean, I could talk about painting and teaching forever.
I can fucking tell.
I take what I would say more of a, I don't know. A lot of students come into my class and they think that they're going to like be painting still lives or doing that sort of thing. And I'm like actively kind of against that. Yeah. But,
because you don't want them to hate life.
Well, exactly. So many, I mean, not to knock anybody who's doing that, but like there is something that can be amazing about being kind of in that meditative state with a group of people. But I want to bring it to people who maybe think that they either can't do it or that they already don't have an interest in it. And that's a really easy way to get people to think that painting's boring. So, but also for me, it was like, I try and approach it in terms of, thinking about visual literacy, like, which reminds me about what you were describing that your teacher doing. And then also thinking about like, how do we actually construct these images? And so that those two things together. So hopefully that it gives them tools to be able to start seeing the world in a different way, or starting to observe how they're seeing the world, and then use that to help them do what they want to do. So I think for them, I don't know, it's hard to say. Like, some of it keeps changing. I think some of even the community of people who were in school during the pandemic have a different set of perspectives than people just even a few years before them who didn't. So I feel like it's constantly changing, or it's like just trying to ride the wave with as things evolve. But what it does seem very universal, and it always feels like a gift to participate in, is that they want to, and I believe this myself, is that like, I think we were meant to make things with our hands. I think we have to, it's like a biological human thing. No. And there's not that many opportunities to do that in contemporary life. And so to be able to create a space for people to connect with materials and then use that as a way to start to learn about themselves and the world becomes really exciting. And that I feel like everybody has fun doing. So that's what I see, is that there's still a kind of hunger for that.
When you said visual literacy, it made me realize that I still struggle with that, because I still will go through Instagram and be like, oh, I saw my friends are doing great.
Yeah, right.
and like feeling connected to them when I haven't even fucking called them or talked to them or spent time with them. That's such a bizarre, you are looking at a magazine of them, it's a very, very strange thing. I wanted to ask you a little bit, because you mentioned before we started recording something about community, and how do you define community within the art world? Is this too awkward to transition into this topic?
Yeah, we can connect to that. I mean, I think that is even weirdly related to teaching, but I mean, I guess to me, it's like it relates and maybe speaks to a larger perspective that I have that I think of as fundamental to even how I approach painting, where I just like don't think that there is a way to survive without having the support of other people. Like, it's something that I say to my students always. I'm just like, your community is your currency. Like, it is also like, because it's really hard. Like, doing this is hard. And I just, it's one of those things that you need to have that friend who's going to remind you like why you're doing this, or what the point is, or just having those different support networks are, I think, like totally crucial for any sort of sustainable practice too. Especially as things evolve, and because the more you live, it's like there's certain things get easier and then new problems come up, and so in that way, I think that that's part of why I like working collaboratively, in addition to just as a structure for making paintings. Because for a while I was like, do I want to be just a teacher? And then just make art for myself? And at a certain point I was like, okay, I can have both, and I don't have to decide. And then even the idea of like, okay, I really love working collaboratively. There's just this like hugely generative space that comes from the unknown of having to mediate while you're working with another person. That to me is just so exciting and always makes better work than just myself. And so then it was like, but I love painting, which is like me being a troll in my troll hole, like doing my thing. And so, but then I was like, okay, I don't have to choose. It's like they are connected. And so, and I even think about that in terms of painting. It's like the way that I'm working is so, as you're saying, it's kind of the mark making is announcing this very subjective encounter that I'm having. And I think about that in the process of thinking through like what subjectivity even is, or it as a document in and of itself. But then there's still something that is so important to me about it being tethered to the community of like this broader history, this broader family of artists, and then also connected to the broader community of people who help make the work, so that it's never like purely just myself that is making the work. Yeah. And I kind of just don't buy that that's ever possible. But again, going back to, it's like maybe the anti-Clement Greenberg, that it's like there is no purity within the process. It is always in community. I will say this about Clement Greenberg. He did give us a shorthand to talk about what we don't like. Right. There you go. Yeah. It's always good. I mean, look, without him, we wouldn't have Stella. So you can't like you said, you celebrate exactly. It's not for you, but or it's not what you work with. Well, look, I have one last question, which I always ask, but you've burned pretty bright this hour, so you don't need to feel like I don't want it to feel like I'm like, give me more. But do you have anything that I didn't ask you about? Anything that you would like to say on your way out while you have the opportunity to, that you might go like, oh man, I wish I had said that. If not, it's totally okay. You really kicked ass. Oh, thanks. I mean, I guess it's funny because the thing that I think is that funny that I didn't bring up. Well, so one thing that it's definitely fun for me to get to sit and talk about painting, but it is weird. What I'll say is that the majority of what I feel like I'm looking at and reading about is a lot of like performance theory. Okay. So it's, if anything, I don't know if that's relevant to bring into it, but that's where I was like, again, it's like, I think that's where I do sit in sometimes a strange space where the work itself performs in this way that is very much like even within this modernist trajectory. But a lot of, I guess that's where I think sometimes the spaces that are generative for artists don't always sit within that same medium. Mm-hmm. I also want to be clear. I don't think you're a modernist. Okay. I mean, that's where it's like, I'm like, but it's a good question. I'm like, what is my relationship to modern? I don't know. Like, no. But it's like, well, I think that modernism and painting are pretty much like, that is the big pivotal moment. So it's hard to have another big painting revolution. Yeah. You know, like, and for that to happen, you'd need something just as powerful as the camera, you know, like, it's almost like it wasn't even its own fault that it happened to it. So within that context, but I do think that you are very conceptual. And I think that I think that it's fair to say that pretty much all painting is conceptual. It's to some degree, right? Like, so, just because we started picking apart the concepts, you know. Well, I think that's even a good place to end on, is like, if there's a point of view, and part of why I still feel like I lean into this very physical kind of approach to painting, it's that there is it's like the theoretical expression of these embodied spaces have as much seriousness as something that seems like it's, I don't know, totally anti-aesthetic conceptualism. And so that there is something interesting and about the kind of type of thinking that a body can do versus something that's like purely analytical in a kind of more rigid sort of way. So
it's kind of a throwback to that period where people were resistant to digital image making and stuff. But then, you know, it's still like artisanal art making.
Yeah,
you know?
right. But those boundaries of kind of high and low, they don't have to be so rigid.
But that it brings up an interesting point, because it sounds to me like the most miserable you would be as a painter is if you had a studio making work for you.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, that to me defeats the total purpose of for me making a painting is 100%.
All right, there we go. That's the end point.
Yeah, there we go.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm glad we ate before this.
Oh yeah. Oh good. I'm so happy to take the time.
I feel like since I've started this podcast, I've learned so much about painting that I can actually hang in this conversation, and you can lead it for me. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Where can people find you? What can you promote? What can I promote for you?
Oh yeah. I am. Let's see. You can find me on my Instagram. But also,
Is it all one word? Oh no, it's Amy Mackay.
It's oh my gosh, what is my Instagram?
I think it is.
I think this is Amy Mackay. And otherwise, there's some potential shows around the bends that are not formalized yet. So otherwise, just
you don't want to jinx them?
Keep an eye out.
No, I'm kidding.
Well, it's you know, you don't want to say something that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So it's but otherwise, I'm working on some new paintings that are going to be a continuation of the Bog series. And so if people were into that, then I'm really excited to make more, and just keep an eye out.
Cool. Yeah. I love talking about painting, it seems.
Yeah. I mean, it's fun.
It's fun.
Yeah.
All right. And like and subscribe if you enjoyed this conversation. Rate us 5 stars where you listen. We have a Patreon. It's at What's My Thesis. Or no, it's What's My Thesis /patreon.com. I think I haven't plugged that in ages. We'll be back next week with another guest and another topic that may or may not be art related. This was like so art heavy. I love it.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. This was a treat.
This was totally my pleasure. Thank you guys for watching.